completes a picture, but every now and then it forces you to be more creative. You can't make a cult film. The audience makes a cult film. The ingredients, you never know.
Next on TCM, X, the man with the X-ray eyes. Then a bucket of blood. And later, the Wasp Woman. It stings to say goodbye to Roger Corman tonight.
Hey, I'm Ben Mankiewicz. Welcome to TCM, where you've joined us for the first of 3 straight Wednesday nights enmeshed in the films of low-budget movie king Roger Corman. Roger, who died in May at the age of 98, was among the defining producer-directors of his time. He wasn't Martin Scorsese, Steven Spielberg, or Francis Ford Coppola, though Coppola, like so many other top-tier filmmakers, got his start working for Roger. But Roger's impact on movies over the last 70 years cannot be overstated. We're also pleased to be bringing you interviews from 2016 with Roger himself. He was a guest on TCM as he reflected on the legacy of American International Pictures. In a moment, we'll have Roger and me discussing our next film, one he directed in 1963 for AIP, with Ray Milland leading the cast, X, the man with the X-ray eyes. But first, a little context on why Roger Corman matters so much when considering the full history of American movies. Roger Corman earned the nickname the King of the Bees because he could make an entertaining and profitable film for a staggeringly low price. Sometimes he could make 2 for that price. And he made so many of them. His page on the website IMDb lists more than 50 director credits for Roger and 491 credits as a producer. More than mere numbers, Roger is also the godfather of what's known as the Corman School of Filmmaking, the list of producers, directors, and actors who learned at the hand of Roger is too long to detail now, but it includes not only Coppola, but Jonathan Demme, Joe Dante, James Cameron, Ron Howard, Peter Bogdanovich, even Jack Nicholson. Martin Scorsese, already a rising young director, even made a movie for Corman, Boxcar Bertha from 1972, which we'll show in a couple of weeks as part of our tribute to Roger. Now, though, let's hear from Roger Corman himself. Here he is on TCM with me 8 years ago, discussing his 1963 film with a cast led by Ray Milland, X, the man with the X-ray eyes. Hi there, I'm Ben Mankiewicz. Welcome back to TCM's Spotlight on American International Pictures. Here to talk about our next movie is a key figure in AIP's storied history, the recipient of an honorary Academy Award in 2009, Roger Corman. Welcome back, Roger.
Happy to be here.
Up next in our lineup from 1963, directed by Roger, Ray Milland, and believe it or not, Don Rickles, starring X, the man with the X-ray eyes. So we talked a little bit earlier tonight about a 1962 film you made, The Intruder, which was a deviation for you, a serious film about racial integration in the schools in the South. With this, the next year, X, the man with the X-ray eyes, you were back to the Roger Corman brand.
Back in the saddle once more.
Back in the saddle once more. What's the history behind X, the man with the X-ray eyes?
The history is simply, I thought of the idea of a man with X-ray eyes who could see through things, and I thought it would be an interesting psychological study, and at the same time I could play around with the special effects available at that time. So I tried to come up with different ideas. Generally, I will write the first treatment myself and then bring in the screenwriter. And I couldn't think of a subject matter. And finally, I decided I would do the story of a jazz musician who's had too many drugs and starts to see through things. I was about halfway through the treatment, and I thought, this doesn't make any sense at all. So I threw the treatment out and went back to an idea I had rejected as being too cliche, which was simply a scientist experimenting with vision.
You landed a big star here, Ray Milland. Was he your top choice, or did he sort of fall into your lap?
No, he was my top choice because I had done so many pictures with Vincent, who could have easily played this role.
Yes.
I felt I wanted to vary a little bit. Ray had been a major star, an Academy Award winner, a very handsome man, but an underrated actor, even though he had won an Academy Award for I think, The Lost Weekend.
For The Lost Weekend, yeah.
And I just thought he was such a good actor that I wanted to work with him.
And did you have any trouble convincing actors of Ray Milland's stature to come work in a Roger Corman movie, you know, a sci-fi movie, like the brand that you were associated with?
I had no trouble convincing Ray. I had a little bit of trouble convincing his agent. I had sent the script to Ray through his agent. They sent it to him. He said he wanted to do it. They expected him to turn it down. And when he said yes, I then had to convince the agent, not Ray.
So you get Ray Milland to be the star. I mentioned it there in the introduction. I think many people will be surprised to see Don Rickles in this movie.
I'd seen Don Rickles act in Las Vegas, and he was very funny. He was very bombastic and, as you know, insulting everybody in sight. And there was a part in the picture for a circus barker who I thought fit Don Rickles perfectly. To my great surprise, he was a little bit nervous on the opening day, and I thought Don Rickles is the last guy in the world to be nervous. But we talked a little bit, and I sort of led him into telling a few jokes. He eased back, and he was great in the picture.
And you let him ad-lib a little bit.
Yes, I asked him to ad-lib, and he did.
Do you remember the budget for Man with the X-Ray Eyes?
It was close to $300,000. We were spending a little bit more money. It was maybe $280, something like that.
All right, Roger, thanks very much. Let's take a look at it from 1963, making its TCM premiere. It's Ray Milland in X, the Man with the X-Ray Eyes.
Roger Corman, who produced and directed X, The Man with the X-Ray Eyes, received an honorary Academy Award in 2009. Really a remarkable achievement for a man whose films weren't crafted to win Oscars, but to please guys named Oscar. It's just a pun, no aspersions cast on people named Oscar. Roger Corman was known as the King of the Bees, as in bee pictures, but in the conversation you're about to see, Roger explains why that was actually a misnomer.
I am back with the director of X, the Man with the X-Ray Eyes, Roger Corman. Roger, this movie feels like it had a bigger budget than many of your earlier films. Is that true?
It had a slightly bigger budget, yes.
Do you remember what you spent here?
It was a little bit under $300,000, maybe $280, something like that.
That's a pretty big budget for a Roger Corman film.
For
right?
me, it was.
You know, if you look through newspaper headlines from the 60s and 70s, there's a lot of them refer to Roger Corman, the King of the Bees. But that's not an entirely fair description that you made solely bee pictures.
Well, I've been called King of the Bees. There's nothing you can do about what people are going to call you. I could be called worse.
You could, yes.
But actually, I was on some talk show once, and somebody asked me about being King of the Bees, and my answer was, I've never made a bee picture in my life, which is true, because people don't know what a bee picture is. In the 1930s, during the Depression, the major studios would send out 2 pictures for the price of 1. They would have, at the beginning of the year, their A list of pictures, which would be the top half of the double bill. They would have their B list of pictures, which would be the lower half of the double bill, which would be a less expensive picture. By the time television came around, times were better. They didn't want to send out 2 pictures instead of 1, and television had, at that time, sort of usurped the position of B pictures. So technically, there were no longer any B pictures when I started making films.
So I'm interested in the names that you were called, and I saw you in the documentary about you in an interview with Tom Snyder. He asked you about whether you resented, and this must have been 30 years ago at least, maybe longer, whether you resented being called Schlockmeister.
That one I resent. I will say that one I don't like.
How come?
I think it's a crummy name.
But it's interesting. I get why you would have resented it then, but now you get directors like Quentin Tarantino and Eli Roth who fully embrace that moniker. It's almost like you gave credibility to it.
I hadn't thought of it that way, but if I did, I might have given the first step. And I know Quentin and Eli well, and they've taken the genre and really have elevated it. Quentin in particular. Pictures like Pulp Fiction and Glorious Bastards and so forth have origins in B pictures, but they're done so well. I'll go beyond that. They're done so brilliantly that they become a genre of their own.
You know, I had the good fortune of being able to talk to you for some time on the last TCM cruise. And then after that time, I was able to spend some time and have a long interview with Quentin Tarantino. And then I went ahead and saw his latest film, The Hateful Eight. And for me, it was impossible not to watch The Hateful Eight and think time and time again, and this is only complimentary, that's Roger Corman. That's Roger Corman there in The Hateful Eight. That must be very satisfying for you.
It is, because I think Quentin is really one of the best filmmakers around. I think he does brilliant work.
That was me with the man, the legend, the khaki-wearing renegade Roger Corman. He joined us on TCM in 2016 for our spotlight on American International Pictures, where Roger was a top producer and director in the 1950s and 60s. The rest of our lineup tonight includes more Corman classics from AIP. Coming up, a character actor who became a Corman mainstay gets a rare crack at a leading role. Dick Miller stars in A Bucket of Blood. Next on TCM.
Next on TCM, A Bucket of Blood. Then, The Wasp Woman. And later, The Little Shop of Horrors. We're feeding you more Corman on TCM tonight.
Hello, I'm Ben Mankiewicz. Thanks for watching TCM, where we're in the middle of a lineup of films from a man who carved out a piece of the movie business and made it his own, producer and director Roger Corman. Roger died in late May at his home in Southern California. He was 98. Roger Corman was not a type. There really wasn't anyone like him. He became the king, the emperor of quickly produced low-budget fare. These movies found an audience. Roger had a hand in producing more than 450 films over his lifetime. The majority of those, overwhelming majority, made money. Roger's 1990 autobiography is aptly titled How I Made 100 Movies in Hollywood and Never Lost a Dime. Roger's style, his awareness of the audience, and his thriftiness with the dollar made him a hugely influential figure in Hollywood. You'll see that over the first 3 Wednesday nights in July as we honor Roger's considerable legacy and discuss the litany of prominent filmmakers he influenced. Tonight's lineup is focused on movies Roger both produced and directed. Up next, released by American International Pictures in 1959, A Bucket of Blood. The story wouldn't be out of place in a lurid horror comic book of the era. Dick Miller, who became a regular performer in Corman-made films, though this is a rare leading role for him, plays Walter Paisley, a schlubby busboy at a beatnik hangout. He doesn't seem to have much going for him. Walter dreams of being an artist, but the coffee shop hipsters sneer and laugh at him behind his back. When Walter stumbles upon a gruesome way to make artistic masterpieces, the bohemian world finally embraces him and digs his crazy creations. Roger made A Bucket of Blood with a budget that today would be considered a drop in the bucket. When you don't have much money to produce a movie, you have to work fast. That was another Roger Corman trademark. He shot A Bucket of Blood in 5 days, partly just to prove to himself that he could do it. Film is a departure from Corman's previous efforts, a horror-comedy mix that also slyly pokes fun at the pretensions of the art world. Here it is, from 1959, A Bucket of Blood. When Dick Miller, the star of A Bucket of Blood, first met Roger Corman, Miller was set on working as a writer. Miller said Corman told him, "I don't need writers. I got plenty of writers. I need actors." "Fine," Miller replied. "I'm an actor." The director gave him a part in his 1955 Western, Apache Woman playing a Native American. After they shot the scene, Corman asked Miller, "How'd you like to be a cowboy for me?" Miller agreed and asked Corman if he was shooting another Western. No, said Corman, the same Western. That sort of told me what kind of a picture we were dealing with, Miller said. Miller gave Corman full credit for putting him on the path to his long and prolific showbiz career. Miller appeared in nearly 200 films and TV series, including dozens of movies made by Corman and the long list of filmmakers Corman influenced and hired. An instantly recognizable face, Miller would pop up in small parts, playing cab drivers, salesmen, police officers, and the like, often turning those thankless minor roles into memorable moments. A Bucket of Blood represented a rare leading part for Miller, who also had a significant role in one of Corman's best-known films as a director, the original 1960 version of The Little Shop of Horrors. Coming up, our night of thriftily made classics directed by Roger Corman continues with a 1959 horror sci-fi flick about a cosmetics mogul searching for the fountain of youth. The Wasp Woman is next on TCM.
Next on TCM, The Wasp Woman, then The Little Shop of Horrors, and later, Creature from the Haunted Sea. We're swimming in Corman on TCM tonight.
Hey there, Ben Mankiewicz with you on TCM, where we're in the middle of the first of 3 nights this month honoring a remarkably influential and efficient filmmaker, Roger Corman. Roger proved you didn't need big stars or big budgets to become a Hollywood success, consistently making movies that found an audience and turned a profit. Roger, a great supporter and friend at TCM, died in May at 98 at his Santa Monica home. His legacy is enormous. Disciples of his, directors who worked with him when they were young, have gone on to become top-tier filmmakers. Consider these names: Francis Ford Coppola, Peter Bogdanovich, Jonathan Demme, Ron Howard, Joe Dante, James Cameron. Martin Scorsese's third feature film, Boxcar Bertha, was made for Roger. Tonight we are showcasing films Roger both directed and produced. He focused almost exclusively on producing after 1970. Up next, The King of the Bees makes a movie about wasps. From 1959, The Wasp Woman. Susan Cabot stars as a successful and driven cosmetics mogul. She's also the face of her brand. When her company's sales begin to sag, it's blamed on her aging appearance. I mean, come on, she's 40. Anyway, she becomes desperate to keep her company afloat in those dark days before Botox, TikTok filters, and common sense. She comes across an eccentric chemist who convinces her the key to eternal youth resides in his royal jelly, produced by queen wasps, and she agrees to try it. Since this is a Roger Corman movie, the actors usually did their own stunts, jumping into whatever Roger had in store for them, with fingers crossed that the results wouldn't look too absurd. For The Wasp Woman, this meant 5'2" Susan Cabot had to find a way to toss around male co-stars a foot taller than she was. The only way I felt I could convincingly down a bigger person was through swiftness, Cabot said later, by coming at them so fast like a bolt of lightning. As she did it on screen, she also had a mouthful of Hershey's syrup to create the film's bloody, biting effects. What we did for Roger Corman, I mean, these were things that you could never do in a real studio, Cabot said, before adding, everything seemed unreal with him. The Wasp Woman was a typically fast and frugal Roger Corman production, the first he directed for his newly created company, the Film Group. It was shot for about $50,000 in less than 2 weeks. From 1959, also with Anthony Isley and Barbara Morris, The Wasp Woman. Roger Corman was not afraid to reuse footage, sets, or ideas. In fact, he was determined to do so. In the mid-1990s, the premium cable network Showtime pitched Corman on a sci-fi and horror series that would include new films as well as remakes of some of his past work. Corman's company, Concord New Horizons, cranked out 13 films in 6 months for the series, titled Roger Corman Presents. One of those remakes was The Wasp Woman, updated for the cable TV era with gore, color, and, of course, nudity. It starred Scream Queen Jennifer Rubin, with Corman disciple Jim Wynorski directing. Wynorski began his career doing publicity for Corman before directing several Corman-produced features, including a 1988 remake of Corman's Not of This Earth, starring the former adult movie actress Tracy Lords, who by then had successfully become a more mainstream actress. Coming up, one of Corman's best-known films, a 1960 horror comedy that would get an unexpected and wildly successful rebirth in the 1980s. Featuring Jack Nicholson in one of his earliest film roles, Jonathan Hayes stars in The Little Shop of Horrors. Next on TCM.
Next on TCM, The Little Shop of Horrors, then Creature from the Haunted Sea, and later, Atlas. There's no shrugging off Corman on TCM tonight.
Hey there, I'm Ben Mankiewicz. Welcome to TCM, where we're in the middle of night one of a three-night tribute to a filmmaker with a quintessential only in America success story, the prolific and wildly influential producer and director Roger Corman. Roger died at 98 in May at his Southern California home. In addition to our films tonight, we'll have lineups of Roger's movies in prime time for the next 2 Wednesdays. Tonight's lineup is dedicated to movies Roger produced and directed in black and white early in his career. Roger Corman famously made his movies inexpensively. A byproduct of frugality is rapidity. To keep costs down, Roger had to make his movies quickly. That was certainly the case with our next picture. It's a black comedy that has gone on to become perhaps his best-known work. It's from 1960, The Little Shop of Horrors. Here's the setup. A nebbishy florist, Seymour, is inspired to create a plant to impress the girl he has a crush on. She's a co-worker. He names the plant after the girl, Audrey Jr. This plant doesn't rely on photosynthesis for nourishment. It has a taste for blood and the ability to talk. As it grows bigger and bigger, Seymour is forced to make some allowances for his creation. The Little Shop of Horrors wasn't merely made quickly. This is the record holder for Roger Corman, the fastest he'd ever made a movie. 2 days and 1 night of shoots, all done on a set left over from another film with a budget of around $25,000 to $30,000. Roger Corman didn't think Little Shop of Horrors would have much value after its initial run, so he didn't bother to copyright it, allowing it to fall into the public domain. An unexpected payoff, though, came in 1982 when songwriters Alan Menken and Howard Ashman turned The Little Shop of Horrors into a smash off-Broadway musical. Then in 1986, the musical was adapted into a film directed by Frank Oz and starring Rick Moranis and Steve Martin. Just this past March came word that Corman, then 97 years old, would be a producer on a new reboot of the story, Little Shop of Halloween Horrors, to be directed by Joe Dante, who started his career working for Roger Corman. Tonight, we have the original, starring Jonathan Hayes, Jackie Joseph, Dick Miller, and 23-year-old Jack Nicholson, who nearly steals the show as a masochistic dental patient. Produced and distributed by the film group and released in 1960, this is The Little Shop of Horrors. Roger Corman called The Little Shop of Horrors one of the best titles he had ever come up with. It implied a horror film, said Corman of the title, but it also implied there was going to be some humor in it. The Little Shop of Horrors was the second in a trilogy of black comedy films by Corman, which included A Bucket of Blood and Creature from the Haunted Sea. All 3 of those were written by Charles B. Griffith, who had several bit roles in The Little Shop of Horrors, in addition to providing the voice for Audrey Jr. Griffith was not merely an important Roger Corman collaborator. He became an influential force in the low-budget movie world with his satiric and subversive screenplays. Those included the 1966 biker flick The Wild Angels and the 1975 pitch-black action comedy Death Race 2000. Filmmaker Quentin Tarantino cited Griffith as an important influence on his work and dedicated his 2007 film, Death Proof, to Griffith. Coming up, the final Corman-Griffith horror comedy in their trilogy, an inept crook finds out the hard way that a mythical monster is all too real. From 1961, Creature from the Haunted Sea is next on Turner Classic Movies.
Next Next on TCM, Creature from the Haunted Sea, then Atlas, and later, Tower of London. Corman pays the price on TCM tonight.
Hello, I'm Ben Mankiewicz. Welcome to TCM and another Wednesday night in July spent honoring the rich and varied career of a filmmaker known as the King of the Bees, Roger Corman. Roger, who was a big supporter of TCM, died in May at 98 at his Santa Monica home. Throughout the last half of the 20th century and well into the 21st, Corman made his name and fortune cranking out low-budget movies. But in the early 1960s, Corman set his sights on more challenging artistic endeavors, adapting the works of Gothic horror writer Edgar Allan Poe for the big screen. Corman recruited the perfect star for these films, Vincent Price. Between 1960 and 64, they teamed up for 7 Poe adaptations. We have 4 of them in tonight's lineup, and we begin with perhaps the best of the bunch. From American International Pictures in 1960, directed by Roger Corman with a screenplay by Richard Matheson, House of Usher. A blonde Vincent Price, minus his trademark mustache, stars as Roderick Usher, the owner of a decaying mansion, the House of Usher. Roderick is an odd man, the kind who seems at home in a decaying mansion. He shares it with his sister, played by Myrna Fahey. When her fiancé, that's Mark Damon, arrives one night, a family curse is revealed that haunts the House of Usher. The film was a huge leap in production quality and budget for American International Pictures, or AIP. The studio doubled its usual budget for a Roger Corman film. The extra money and time spent making it paid off. It became a huge hit for AIP. Its heavily atmospheric style was an important departure for Corman. When AIP read the script, the first thing they questioned was the absence of a monster. Corman later said, to them, a horror picture had to have a monster. I countered by saying the house was the monster. Corman also had several essential collaborators on the film who would work on many of the director's Poe adaptations. They became informally known as the Corman Crew. The screenwriter, Richard Matheson, adapted Poe material in screenplays for the first 3 films on our bill tonight. Production designer Daniel Holler worked wonders with the modest budgets he was given. And veteran cinematographer Floyd Crosby brought Corman's films into a widescreen world of saturated colors. Here's some fun party trivia before we show the movie. Floyd Crosby was the father of singer-songwriter David Crosby. Now here's the movie from 1960, House of Usher. The Roger Corman-Vincent Price collaboration that kicked off with House of Usher proved to be important to both men. When Corman met the veteran actor, it was clear Price understood the works of Edgar Allan Poe and that he would respect Corman. He didn't think that he was dropping down in the caliber of films he was starring in, Corman said of Price. They were good parts. He took every film very seriously. Price was impressed by Corman's intelligence and organizational skills as a filmmaker. Price later offered some insight into Corman's mindset. What he tried to do with all of us who worked in those pictures, Price said, was to express some of the psychology of Poe's characters. Their next collaboration is our next film. An Englishman heads to a mysterious, foreboding castle in Spain to investigate his sister's death. The Pit and the Pendulum is coming up on TCM.
Next on TCM, House of Usher, then Edgar Allan Poe's Pit and the Pendulum, and later, The Raven. We never say nevermore on TCM today.
Hello, I'm Ben Mankiewicz. Welcome to TCM and another Wednesday night in July spent honoring the rich and varied career of a filmmaker known as the King of the Bees, Roger Corman. Roger, who was a big supporter of TCM, died in May at 98 at his Santa Monica home. Throughout the last half of the 20th century and well into the 21st, Corman made his name and fortune cranking out low-budget movies. But in the early 1960s, Corman set his sights on more challenging artistic endeavors, adapting the works of Gothic horror writer Edgar Allan Poe for the big screen. Corman recruited the perfect star for these films, Vincent Price. Between 1960 and 64, they teamed up for 7 Poe adaptations. We have 4 of them in tonight's lineup, and we begin with perhaps the best of the bunch. From American International Pictures in 1960, directed by Roger Corman with a screenplay by Richard Matheson, House of Usher. A blonde Vincent Price, minus his trademark mustache, stars as Roderick Usher, the owner of a decaying mansion, the House of Usher. Roderick is an odd man, the kind who seems at home in a decaying mansion. He shares it with his sister, played by Myrna Fahey. When her fiancé, that's Mark Damon, arrives one night, a family curse is revealed that haunts the House of Usher. The film was a huge leap in production quality and budget for American International Pictures, or AIP. The studio doubled its usual budget for a Roger Corman film. The extra money and time spent making it paid off. It became a huge hit for AIP. Its heavily atmospheric style was an important departure for Corman. When AIP read the script, the first thing they questioned was the absence of a monster. Corman later said, "To them, a horror picture had to have a monster." I countered by saying the house was the monster. Corman also had several essential collaborators on the film who would work on many of the director's Poe adaptations. They became informally known as the Corman crew. The screenwriter, Richard Matheson, adapted Poe material in screenplays for the first 3 films on our bill tonight. Production designer Daniel Holler worked wonders with the modest budgets he was given. And veteran cinematographer Floyd Crosby brought Corman's films into a widescreen world of saturated colors. Here's some fun party trivia before we show the movie. Floyd Crosby was the father of singer-songwriter David Crosby. Now here's the movie from 1960, House of Usher. The Roger Corman-Vincent Price collaboration that kicked off with House of Usher proved to be important to both men. When Corman met the veteran actor, it was clear Price understood the works of Edgar Allan Poe and that he would respect Corman. He didn't think that he was dropping down in the caliber of films he was starring in, Corman said of Price. They were good parts. He took every film very seriously. Price was impressed by Corman's intelligence and organizational skills as a filmmaker. Price later offered some insight into Corman's mindset. What he tried to do with all of us who worked in those pictures, Price said, was to express some of the psychology of Poe's characters. Their next collaboration is our next film. An Englishman heads to a mysterious, foreboding castle in Spain to investigate his sister's death. The Pit and the Pendulum is coming up on TCM.
Next on TCM, Edgar Allan Poe's Pit and the Pendulum, then The Raven, and later The Mask of the Red Death. Corman knows his Poe on TCM today.
Generally, a lack of money hurts a picture, but every now and then, it forces you to be more creative. You can't make a cult film. The audience makes a cult film. The ingredients, you never know.
Hi, I'm Ben Mankiewicz. Thanks for joining us on TCM as we continue our tribute to Roger Corman, who died on May 9th at 98, leaving an impressive legacy of films and filmmakers who learned their trade working with Corman. Roger Corman earned the nickname the King of the Bees because he could make an entertaining and profitable film for a staggeringly low price. Sometimes he could make 2 for that price. Tonight, we have a lineup of Corman's collaborations with Vincent Price. Low-budget thrillers adapted from the macabre works of Edgar Allan Poe. Up next from 1961, The Pit and the Pendulum. Set in Spain during the Inquisition, a young Englishman travels to a remote castle to investigate his sister's mysterious death. The castle belongs to her husband, a nobleman, played by Vincent Price. Corman appeared on TCM in 2016 to co-host a spotlight on American International Pictures, AIP. Of course, The Pit and the Pendulum, one of the studio's biggest hits, was among the films we showed, so we thought it fitting to bring you a part of that conversation. Here is Roger Corman with me in 2016 to discuss The Pit and the Pendulum.
Hi there, everybody. I'm Ben Mankiewicz. Welcome to TCM's Spotlight on Films released by American International Pictures, or AIP. Joining me every Thursday night this month, my co-host, venerable director and producer, Roger Corman. Roger, great to have you back.
Happy to be here.
Our first film tonight is a movie that could be considered one of the best from AIP, or for that matter, from any other studio. From 1961, adapted from Edgar Allan Poe's short story, it's The Pit and the Pendulum. So you are associated with many things. One of them is that you are the definitive Edgar Allan Poe storyteller. How did that come to pass?
Well, I had been making a series of low-budget films for American International and a couple of other studios, and they had a sales pattern of putting two low-budget black and white feature films together as a double feature. Two horror films, two science fiction films, whatever, shot in 10 days for about $60,000, $70,000. And AIP wanted me to make two of those low-budget horror films. And I was getting a little bit tired of this, and I also felt it was a sales gimmick that they were maybe using too often. And I said, let me have more than that. Let me have 15 days, in the big time, to have 15 days, and I want to shoot in color. And they said, what do you want to make? And I said, I want to do Edgar Allan Poe's The Fall of the House of Usher. And Jim agreed, and Sam Markoff said, but Roger, there's no monster in the House of Usher. So I said, thinking fairly quickly, I said, Sam, the house is the monster. He said, okay, we'll make the picture.
What arrogance you have, thinking that you could get 2 weeks to make an entire movie.
Right.
So you mentioned Sam Arkoff, you mentioned Jim, that's Jim Nicholson. Those were the two executives at
Yes.
AIP. I get that you talked AIP into making Poe movies. Why were you interested in Poe? What made you think these would make good movies?
I had always loved the work of Poe. I'd read The Fall of the House of Usher as a school assignment in, I think, the 10th grade or something like that. And I asked my parents for the complete works of Edgar Allan Poe for Christmas. They were happy to give it to me. I could have asked for a shotgun or who knows what. And I always wanted to make The House of Usher. The picture was successful, so AIP asked me to make a second one, and I chose The Pit and the Pendulum as the second film.
Was it difficult to turn what were short stories into full-length screenplays? Your movies aren't long, but still there had to be some expansion of Poe's story.
There was some difficulty because, as you say, they were not only short stories, but sometimes extremely short stories, just a couple of pages. So what Dick Matheson, who wrote most of the scripts, and I did, we would take the elements of the Poe short story and use it as the equivalent of a third act of the play, and then try to say what led up to this and what would Poe have done. We wanted to stay as truthful as we could to Poe's vision.
So your idea wasn't sort of to add to it, but to build up to it.
Yes, exactly.
Interesting. I don't know whether you recall this, but the director, Ron Howard, who's a graduate of the Corman School of Filmmaking, he says that the television ads for The Pit and the Pendulum was the first time he remembers a TV commercial getting him excited to see a movie. Do you recall the ad?
I don't recall specifically the ads, but I didn't make them, but I collaborated with whoever did the editing on it. The ads were primarily the last scene with John Carr under the pendulum and above the pit, with the pendulum coming down like this, lower and lower and lower, and eventually slicing his shirt. And meanwhile, I was cutting to the gears, and it was really a nice sort of montage. I was very pleased with the way that came together.
And it clearly worked. It got people excited to see how that was going to turn out for him. Here it is from 1961, featuring a screenplay by Richard Matheson, directed by my co-host. It's Vincent Price in The Pit and the Pendulum.
The Pit and the Pendulum's shocking climax is one of the most striking scenes ever in a Roger Corman film. The pendulum was constructed of wood and metal with a rubber blade. John Carr, the actor strapped under the slow swinging device, was understandably a bit nervous. John came up to me with a very worried look on his face, said Roger Corman. He asked me, Roger, do you really think that thing is safe? The director volunteered to get under the pendulum during rehearsal to show Carr it posed no danger. But as that massive blade began to swing closer and closer, Roger Corman started having second thoughts. It started coming down, and I thought, maybe John is right. A grip stopped the blade in the nick of time, convincing Carr to do the scene. Carr also had a metal plate strapped to his chest, you know, just in case. Roger Corman cast a British actress as Elizabeth, the sister who'd go on to become a cult figure among devoted horror fans, Barbara Steele. Steele had starred in Black Sunday, director Mario Bava's influential Italian horror film. Both Steele and the movie had impressed Corman. Black Sunday had been acquired, recut, and redubbed by American International Pictures, where Corman was under contract. It became their highest-grossing film to date. Corman regarded Steele as vital to the Pit and the Pendulum's success overseas and moved her name up in the credits to help sell tickets in European markets. Coming up, Corman teams with Vincent Price again with a pair of horror movie giants as well in a Poe adaptation that mixes comedy into the equation. The Raven is next on TCM.
Next on TCM, The Raven, then The Mask of the Red Death, and later, Bloody Mama. TCM's got the mother of all Corman tributes today.
Hey there, I'm Ben Mankiewicz. Thanks for watching TCM, where we're spending the first 3 Wednesday nights of July honoring the films and the legacy of a filmmaking giant, Roger Corman, who died at his home in Santa Monica in May at the age of 98. Roger's death hit Hollywood and TCM hard. He was a good and loyal friend to us over the years. Now, we would have devoted all 5 Wednesday nights in May to Roger's movies, but we didn't have the budget. I'm fairly certain Roger would have appreciated that line. He is Hollywood's definitive low-budget producer. Roger had this unique ability to take a scandalously small budget, pair it with an unrealistically tight shooting schedule, and turn it into not only an entertaining film, but a profitable one, sometimes 2 profitable ones. During the earlier stage of his career, Roger was a regular behind the camera, applying his eye for storytelling with his eye for cutting reasonable corners to get things done. Tonight, we are focused on Roger Corman, the director, though these are films he also produced. We're featuring 4 of Corman's Edgar Allan Poe adaptations from the 1960s. All have Vincent Price as the star. Up next, the screen version of one of Poe's most famous works. From Alta Vista Productions in 1963, released by American International Pictures, The Raven. Vincent Price leads the way as Dr. Erasmus Craven, a retired sorcerer who longs for his departed love, Lenore. Until this film, I really didn't know you could retire from sorcery. I figured you just kept on sorcering until you died. Anyway, Craven's life is invaded by a talking raven who claims he's been put under a spell by another powerful wizard played by Boris Karloff. That's where another horror movie stalwart enters the picture, Peter Lorre, playing a character connected to the Raven. The big selling point of the Raven were the big 4, Corman, Price, Karloff, and Lorre. Corman billed the 3 horror movie masters as the great triumvirate of terror. Screenwriter Richard Matheson, who had adapted Corman's earlier Poe movies, infused The Raven with much more comedy than the previous adaptations. Matheson had room to stretch. The Poe poem he was adapting, it's only 108 lines long. From 1963, also with Jack Nicholson as Laurie's son, and I'll have much more about how these screen legends work together after we see the film. Here is The Raven. As I mentioned before the movie, and you certainly noticed, there was much more comedy in The Raven than the prior Edgar Allan Poe adaptations produced and directed by Roger Corman and starring Vincent Price. Much of it was in Richard Matheson's script, but many of the lines were added during the production. Peter Lorre frequently went off script, ad-libbing jokes and asides. Vincent Price adapted to Lorre's liberties with the script, but Boris Karloff grew annoyed and frustrated by them. With Boris and Peter, there was tension and an incredible clash of acting methods, Roger Corman said. The actor who played Laurie's son quickly adapted to Laurie's loose acting style. That's because he was played by a Corman regular at the time, Jack Nicholson. Nicholson later said he adored working with Laurie and was given a good bit of advice by Roger Corman. Just try to be as funny as Lorre, Karloff, and Price. The one co-star Nicholson wasn't fond of, The Raven. It just pooped endlessly, said Jack. My whole right shoulder was constantly covered with raven poop. Nicholson, as you perhaps surmised, didn't use the word poop. Probably said, I don't know, dung or waste. Coming up, a devil worshipper throws a twisted masked ball in a rare Corman production shot in the UK. The Mask of the Red Death is next on TCM.
Next on TCM, The Mask of the Red Death, then Bloody Mama. and later, The Wild Angels. TCM goes full throttle today.
Hey there, Ben Mankiewicz with you on TCM. We're wrapping up a quartet of Edgar Allan Poe adaptations from director Roger Corman, all of them starring Vincent Price. We're showing the movies as part of our three-night tribute to Corman, last Wednesday, tonight, and next Wednesday night. Roger, a great supporter at TCM's, died in May at the age of 98. His legacy cannot really be overstated. So many talented filmmakers and actors emerged from the informal Roger Corman Film School. Jack Nicholson, Ron Howard, Joe Dante, Jonathan Demme, Peter Bogdanovich, James Cameron, Francis Ford Coppola, and that is just scratching the surface. Roger's legacy is also in the films he made as a director and a producer. Visit Roger's IMDb.com page and you'll find 56 credits as a director and 491 as a producer. He is the most influential B-movie producer of all time. One story related to our last film, The Raven, exemplifies the spirit of a Roger Corman film, turning an extra dollar and an extra actor into a new project. Corman raced through production on The Raven so quickly that when he was done, he had a couple of extra shooting days, which meant access to a huge set and actors Boris Karloff and Jack Nicholson hanging around with nothing to do. So Roger decided to make another picture quickly, or at least shoot footage he could then cobble together later into a movie. Now, the project would eventually take 9 months to complete, the longest shoot of his career. That finished film, The Terror, required a slew of novice directors to pull together, some of whom would go on to much greater fame. Francis Ford Coppola worked on the movie. So did Monty Hellman, who'd soon make a pair of wild revisionist westerns for Corman with Jack Nicholson. And another future cult director worked on the film, Jack Hill, whose Corman Productions turned Pam Grier into an unforgettable action star in the 1970s. The Terror itself was an incoherent mess. Still, I believe it made money. Furthermore, another Corman disciple, Peter Bogdanovich, reused footage from The Terror for his impressive 1968 feature debut, Targets, which starred Boris Karloff. That is the Roger Corman legacy. Up next tonight, another film in the Poe-Corman-Price oeuvre. From 1964, The Mask of the Red Death. Set in medieval Italy, Vincent Price stars as Prince Prospero, a devoutly religious devil worshipper. I think that's enough of a setup. One final note for Edgar Allan Poe fans. Since Poe's short story, The Mask of the Red Death, was too short for a feature film, Corman combined it with another Poe short story to get this movie up to its 90-minute runtime. From American International Pictures in 1964, also with Hazel Court and Jane Asher, The Mask of the Red Death. In 2019, a new 4K restoration of Roger Corman's The Mask of the Red Death premiered in London. That followed a long restoration process orchestrated by Martin Scorsese's Film Foundation and the Academy, with funding from the Hobson Lucas Family Foundation. Scorsese was one of the many filmmakers who got a break working for Roger Corman. Scorsese directed Boxcar Bertha for Roger in 1972. Scorsese wasn't exactly a full-on disciple of the informal Roger Corman Film School. Scorsese was already a rising young director by 1972. But Corman still had a big influence on Scorsese, who called Roger Corman one of the most important American directors ever. Scorsese said, as much as anyone else, Corman taught him the value of preparation. In Boxcar Bertha, shortly before production started, Roger visited Scorsese and told him, "You're going to shoot all the scenes with the train in the first 4 days." Scorsese called it his baptism by fire. That's it for the hosted portion of tonight's Roger Corman Marathon, but his movies continue. Coming up, Shelley Winters stars in Corman's saga of gangster Ma Barker. From 1970, co-starring Pat Hingle, Bruce Dern, and a talented young actor named Robert De Niro, Bloody Mama is next on Turner Classic Movies.
The turning of the projector is...
Hi, I'm Ben Mankiewicz. Welcome to TCM as we continue our salute to the profound legacy of writer, producer, and director Roger Corman. Roger died in May at his Southern California home at the age of 98. Roger was a great friend to TCM, a guest at our festival and on the cruise. He also appeared on the channel, and we will hear from Roger tonight in a conversation he and I had here on TCM in 2016. First, though, a little background on this prolific and influential filmmaker. How prolific was Corman? Well, his Internet Movie Database page lists more than 50 credits as a director. That's solid. And more than 490 as a producer. That is staggering. How influential was Corman? The list of young filmmakers and actors who are considered to have graduated from the informally named Roger Corman Film School includes Francis Ford Coppola, Ron Howard, Jonathan Demme, Joe Dante, and Peter Bogdanovich. James Cameron worked for him, too. So did producer Frank Marshall. In 1972, Martin Scorsese, already a rising young director, made a movie for producer Roger Corman, Boxcar Bertha, which is our first film tonight. Corman earned an apt moniker, the godfather of the B-movie. He realized early in his career that the key to making movies successfully, that is profitably, was to make them as cheaply and efficiently as possible, working on multiple films at various stages of development simultaneously. He'd write his next film while shooting his current film as his previous film was being edited. He was the Henry Ford of cinema, an assembly line of movies. Henry Ford is the right analogy, minus Ford's grotesque anti-Semitism. Corman had the assembly line principle ingrained in him as a kid growing up in Detroit in the shadow of massive car factories. Early in his career, Corman did a lot of writing and directing, but he eventually transitioned solely into producing, which allowed him to give opportunities to young, unproven filmmakers, directors who would go on to become some of the biggest names in the industry, and those are the films we'll be featuring tonight. We begin, as I said, with Boxcar Bertha, the picture Martin Scorsese made for Corman. Roger and I discussed the movie and Roger's admiration for Scorsese back in 2016 as we introduced the film.
Hi there, I'm Ben Mankiewicz. Welcome to TCM's Spotlight on Films released by American International Pictures, AIP. Joining me once again is my co-host, director and producer, Roger Corman. Roger, welcome back.
Happy to be here.
Up next, from 1972, Barbara Hershey stars as a small-town girl falling in love with David Carradine. Together, they form half of a Depression-era team of train robbers. Directed by Martin Scorsese, it's Boxcar Bertha. Martin Scorsese. So how did your relationship with him start, and how did he end up directing Boxcar Bertha?
I had seen an underground film he'd made in New York, and I thought it was really good. And I arranged, I've forgotten how, to meet with him, and I was very impressed by him. He has an encyclopedic knowledge of films. It's just amazing. He can tell you who was in some film from 1925, that sort of thing. And his work was really good. Now, I had done a picture called Bloody Mama, which is a story of the Ma Barker gang, with Shelley Winters playing Ma Barker, who was a Depression-era Southern bank robber. Her farm had been foreclosed, and she and her sons robbed banks. The film had been very successful, and they wanted me to do a sequel. But by that time, I had formed my own company, New World Pictures, and I said, I'll produce it for you, but I'm not going to direct for some other company. So they said, okay. And actually, my wife found the novel Boxcar Bertha, which we freely adapted. And I chose Marty as the director over some opposition. They said, he's a New York boy. You're going to be shooting in Arkansas. What does he know about Arkansas? I said, I don't know, but I know he knows enough about film. He can direct this film.
And when you guys went and saw him, and he'd done some pre-production work on the movie, he had storyboarded the whole film?
He had storyboarded the entire film. I always talk to new directors about storyboarding your film. In my own mind, even when I was directing, I would storyboard maybe 75% of the film. And then when you got to a close-up, I didn't bother to say, okay, it's a close-up here, a close-up there. I knew I was going to do that. But Marty storyboarded 100% of the film. He's the first director I ever saw who did that.
And what did that tell you?
It told me the diligence and how dedicated he was to making the film. And I looked at the storyboards, and they were excellent. You could see that film in advance from the storyboards.
Were you pleased with Boxcar Bertha? Like all your, it made a significant amount of money.
Yes, it was a solid success, both commercially and critically, and I was very pleased with Marty's work. He's clearly one of the great American directors.
All right, Roger, thanks very much. Let's take a look at the movie from 1972, featuring David Carradine's father, John, in a supporting role. Here is Barbara Hershey as Boxcar Bertha.
Martin Scorsese was in no way a household name when he directed Boxcar Bertha. He was, at best, considered someone to keep an eye on inside the industry. Scorsese had directed a documentary, a couple of feature films, a handful of shorts, and he'd done some editing work on the concert film Woodstock. It was an editing job that had him in Los Angeles when he met Roger Corman. Roger originally wanted Scorsese to make a sequel to Roger's hit Big Bad Mama, but then the script for Boxcar Bertha landed on Roger's desk. When Roger and I introduced Boxcar Bertha on TCM in 2016, he said that Scorsese storyboarded the entire movie. Impressed by Scorsese's zealous preparation, Roger gave him 25 days to shoot the picture. He also told him to get all of the train footage he needed first, since they would be the most time-consuming, complicated, and expensive sequences. And if he did that, Roger said, he'd have spent so much of his budget that the studio would never be willing to shut him down. Scorsese took Roger's advice, sending back footage of train wheels turning and trains rolling down the tracks. Studio executives were furious. They wanted to fire Scorsese immediately, but Corman stepped in and said, with all of the train material out of the way, the remainder of the film would go quickly. Roger, of course, was right. Coming up, another Roger Corman-produced movie, this one with first-time feature film director Peter Bogdanovich behind the camera. Targets from 1968 is next on TCM.
Next on TCM, Targets, then Dementia 13, and later Caged Heat. Corman throws away the key on TCM tonight.
Hi, I'm Ben Mankiewicz. Welcome to TCM, where we're once again celebrating the prolific and influential career of filmmaker Roger Corman, who died in May at the age of 98. We've been honoring Corman for the past 2 Wednesday nights. Tonight, we are focusing on the long list of top-tier filmmakers who graduated from the unofficial Roger Corman Film School. We have a lineup of movies produced by Corman and directed by young filmmakers who worked under him. We just had Martin Scorsese's Corman-produced film, Boxcar Bertha. Scorsese wasn't quite like the other directors we're featuring. He didn't come up as part of Corman's production team, and he'd already made a couple of features. The rest of the night belongs to full-fledged Roger Corman disciples. Up next, the first film directed by Peter Bogdanovich. As a young man, Peter made a name for himself in Hollywood as a thoughtful film critic and writer, conducting engrossing interviews with many of his filmmaking idols, including Alfred Hitchcock, Orson Welles, Howard Hawks, and John Ford. Peter also worked the L.A. party circuit, where he met Roger Corman. They hit it off. Soon after, Peter worked as one of Corman's assistants on The Wild Angels. Peter wasn't getting coffee or running errands either. He got a crash course in the Roger Corman style of filmmaking, location scouting, casting, and most importantly, writing and directing the second unit. Corman rewarded Peter with a film of his own, his impressive directorial debut. It's our next movie from 1968, Targets. The film has 2 parallel tracks, one about an aging actor coming to the end of his career, the other about a disaffected young man with a penchant for collecting guns. Bogdanovich tells the stories simultaneously until they come together in a violent climax. The dueling stories were a product of Corman's financially pragmatic approach to making movies. A few years earlier, Corman made a series of horror films with Boris Karloff. The contract stipulated the number of days Karloff had to work. At the end of a Corman-directed film called The Raven, Karloff still owed Corman 2 days. Those 2 days were then used in a disastrous film with multiple directors, The Terror, which starred Karloff and Jack Nicholson. Karloff's deal called for a bonus, $15,000, if The Terror made a certain amount of money. It didn't. But then Corman got this idea. He'd pay Karloff that $15,000 bonus if he'd shoot 2 days with Peter on Targets. Corman figured Peter could get 20 minutes of footage out of Karloff in 2 days. Corman also suggested Peter use 20 or so minutes of footage from The Terror, giving him roughly half of Targets. Peter did as he was told, maybe not a full 20 minutes of The Terror, but he used it, crafting it all together to make his first feature. Here it is. It's quite good. From Peter Bogdanovich in 1968, Boris Karloff stars in Targets. Peter Bogdanovich wasn't the only filmmaker to kick off their career with Targets. It represented the first credited film work for Peter's extraordinarily talented wife, Polly Platt, who co-wrote the story with Peter and served as costume and production designer. Peter and Polly collaborated on several more films before their marriage ended. Polly then went on to become one of Hollywood's top production designers and film producers. Another first-time filmmaker on Targets was a UCLA college student Bogdanovich met at a party. The kid loved film, but more importantly to Peter and Polly, he knew Los Angeles and could help them find locations around town. That college student was Frank Marshall, future Academy Award-nominated producer of Raiders of the Lost Ark, The Color Purple, and The Sixth Sense, to name just a few. Coming up, a film from another of producer Roger Corman's protégés, Francis Ford Coppola. Dementia 13 is next on TCM.
Next on TCM, Dementia 13, then Caged Heat, and later, Piranha. Sink your teeth into some Corman today.
Hey there, Ben Mankiewicz with you. Thanks for watching TCM, where we're celebrating the career of a filmmaker like no other, producer and director Roger Corman. Corman, who died in May at the age of 98, was a longtime TCM friend. He came to the festival. He and his wife, Julie, were guests on the cruise. I also got the chance to interview him as a guest programmer. And on 2 separate seasons of our podcast, The Plot Thickens, we got to probe Roger's expansive memory about 2 people whose careers he launched, director Peter Bogdanovich and actress Pam Grier. Corman was the king of low-budget drive-in B movies, a style of filmmaking he never really sought to abandon. You got the feeling Roger would read the Hollywood trades every morning and say things like, why do they need $100 million to make this film? Why do they need $10 million? Why $1 million? Why spend $40 million when $41,211 will do the job? Think I'm joking? Up next, a film Corman produced that he originally budgeted at $20,000. And like all the movies we're showing tonight, this one also gave an early filmmaking opportunity to a future titan in the industry, in this case, Francis Ford Coppola, from 1963, Dementia 13. It's part gothic horror story, part murder mystery, and it's 100% Roger Corman. It's entirely the result of a budget surplus Corman had on another film, The Young Racers, shot in London. That was a big budget production, like $90,000. When Corman wrapped, he had a $20,000 surplus, plenty to start another movie. On Corman's crew for The Young Racers was a UCLA film student named Francis Ford Coppola, who at this point had directed a couple of softcore pornographic films. Coppola pitched a scene to Corman. A man dives into a lake with 5 baby dolls tied together with rope. At the bottom of that lake, he sees the dead body of a young girl, her long hair flowing in the current, and then he gets axed to death. Corman responded, change the man to a woman and you've got a picture, kid. Coppola immediately got to work on a script, which he completed in 3 whole days. During that time, he met British film producer Raymond Strauss, who was as intrigued with the idea of an axe murder movie as Corman, so Strauss tossed in another $20,000 for the British distribution rights. He also offered up a studio he co-owned in Dublin, Ireland. Script in hand, Coppola and Corman's crew packed up the camera gear in a Volkswagen minibus and took a ferry to Ireland, where Coppola shot the film in just 9 days. On the crew, there was a film student named Eleanor Neal, working as an art director. She eventually married Coppola. We'll have more on her career and their marriage after the movie. From 1963, here are Patrick McGee and Luana Anders in Dementia 13. Among the crew members for Dementia 13 was a UCLA film student named Eleanor Neal, who served as the art director on the movie. She was also the girlfriend of the camera operator, until she wasn't. Soon after that relationship fizzled, Eleanor began dating the film's writer-director, Francis Ford Coppola. As I mentioned before the movie, this was just a 9-day shoot, so like everything else on a Roger Corman movie, they had to fall in love quickly. A few months later, they were married in Las Vegas. Francis and Eleanor Coppola were together for 61 years before Eleanor's death earlier this year. She was an award-winning filmmaker in her own right. She made an Emmy-winning documentary about the making of Apocalypse Now called Hearts of Darkness, a filmmaker's apocalypse. Eleanor Coppola made several more behind-the-scenes documentaries about her husband's work and also wrote and directed the 2016 film Paris Can Wait, starring Diane Lane, as well as the 2020 ensemble romantic drama Love is Love is Love, with Joanna Whalley, Chris Messina, Sybil Shepherd, and Rita Wilson. Coming up, producer Roger Corman gives another up-and-comer his shot. This time it's director Jonathan Demme, who also wrote the screenplay. Caged Heat from 1974 is next on TCM. Hey, Ben Mankiewicz here. Thanks for watching TCM, where we're in the middle of a lineup of movies produced by Roger Corman. Corman died in May at 98 at his Southern California home. Roger Corman was a legitimately legendary figure in Hollywood who showed a legion of young producers and directors that you could make an entertaining, profitable movie for a fraction, a tiny fraction, of what it would cost the big studios. Corman also famously gave early filmmaking opportunities to a number of directors who are today household names. Up next, a film from Jonathan Demme, the future Academy Award-winning director of The Silence of the Lambs. From 1974, this is a women in prison action drama, Caged Heat. If Jonathan Demme had been better at chemistry, he might never have set foot on a film set. Demme aspired to be a veterinarian, but he couldn't pass chemistry. That failure led to reimagining his future around his love of the movies. He became a film critic for a publication in his hometown, Miami, which eventually led to a job in film publicity, working for Roger Corman, who certainly knew how to market movies. Those who worked for Corman never did just one job for long. Almost immediately, Roger had Demme writing a screenplay for a biker picture, Angels Hard as They Come. Corman then tapped Demme to produce the film. On Demme's second Corman production as a producer, The Hot Box, a monsoon in the Philippines put the production behind schedule, so Demme got tapped to direct second unit material. Next thing he knew, Demme was being asked by Corman to write and direct a film of his own. Corman, though, being Roger Corman, had one stipulation. It had to be a women in prison film. At the time, Corman was making movies for his own independent distribution company, New World Pictures, and one of his business strategies was to pre-sell movies to exhibitors. Next fall, I'll give you a biker film, and in the spring, a women in prison picture. Once he sold those ideas, he had to make the movies to fill the slots, which is why Demme had to write and direct an exploitation picture set in a women's correctional institution, complete with plenty of sex, excessive violence, and a light sprinkling of electroshock torture. Caged Heat actually wasn't that big a risk. There was an audience for these type of films. In fact, Caged Heat was the third women in prison film Corman had released in a 3-year period. From 1974, with a cast that includes cult film favorites Juanita Brown and Barbara Steele, Caged Heat. As easy as it is to write off Caged Heat as over-the-top exploitative drive-in fare, it accomplished two significant things. One, it made money. Nearly all of Corman's films did. Two, it gave a valuable filmmaking education to its young director, Jonathan Demme. Demme credited Roger Corman with teaching him about the importance of camera movement to keep an audience's attention. For Corman, the absolute best moving shot you could do is a camera slowly traveling down dolly tracks toward an unopened door. The movement of the camera piquing the viewer's interest about what could be behind that door. Demme took that advice in Caged Heat with a shot revealing all of the female prisoners in their cells as the camera slowly travels down a corridor. Then he repeated that shot quite famously 17 years later when he revealed Hannibal Lecter at the end of a row of cells in The Silence of the Lambs. That's the film that earned Jonathan Demme an Oscar for Best Director. Film also won Best Picture. Demme was forever grateful to Corman for his mentorship and friendship, so much so he often cast him in cameo roles in his films, including Silence of the Lambs, as well as Philadelphia and his remake of The Manchurian Candidate. Ahead, director Joe Dante gets his opportunity to learn from the Roger Corman School of Filmmaking with Corman's version of Jaws, lots of tiny little jaws. Bradford Dillman, Heather Menzies-Urich, and Kevin McCarthy star in Piranha. Next on Turner Classic Movies.